Have you ever felt stuck in a story and thought you just couldn't rewrite it? Back in the day, there was a TV series called Family Affair. It was filmed in 1966, the year I was born. I watched this show as a kid and I fell in love with the orphans, Sissy, Buffy, and Jody. Their parents were killed in a car accident and their little lives were changed forever. Their rich Uncle Bill would become their legal guardian. Uncle Bill lived in an upscale apartment in Manhattan and had a manservant named Mr. French. Mr. French seemed strict, but he had a warm heart, and he would be found behind Bill's back giving the children the attention that they craved. The Mrs. Beasley doll, she represented an older, wiser woman, like a nanny figure, not a baby doll. Buffy and I were about the same age, 6 or 7, I think. And Buffy carried her everywhere. I think Mrs. Beasley was the security Buffy and I were longing for. It was the only gift I'd asked for Christmas that year. I tore open that box with such excitement. I removed her from the box and carefully placed the glasses on her face. I was smitten with my Mrs. Beasley doll. I held her all the time. And I always kept her glasses on, even though when you pulled her string, she asked if you wanted to try them on. My rules wouldn't allow it. And for several years, my Mrs. Beasley doll, she remained pristine. She had her lovely little cape on her shoulders and her skirt, and her hair was always brushed. Sometimes my home could be a scary place. But Mrs. Beasley, she remained my constant. You see, my dad was a mean guy sometimes. One day he decided that my toy collection was out of his control and he gave all my toys away. My dad liked control. And his hangovers left him grouchy and mean as a dry drunk could be. Abuse was a commonplace for my brother and I, both emotionally and physically. That day I returned home from ballet class and I saw what he had done. Panic struck me. Where are my toys? I was screaming by now and I couldn't see any sign of my Mrs. Beasley. My dad heard me and he screamed right back at me. You have enough crap. I gave them all away. I said, what? In a whisper. And then I got a little louder. Where? Where are all my toys? I screamed. Where's my Mrs. Beasley? I remembered just then that he'd thrown out all my Barbies because I hadn't taken good care of them. And when I noticed, it was too late. Maybe there was still time. Maybe I could find my Mrs. Beasley. Dad came back with that evil smile that he sometimes had, and he said, I gave them to the neighbor girl next door. She's little. You're all grown up. You don't need to play with dolls any longer. My panic turned to horror. Please tell me not Mrs. Beasley. I whimpered back to him. He came back with the blue doll. Yep, she loved it. I stood tall, and I tried to go against him, as I sometimes would, and I proclaimed in my strongest 10-year-old voice, well, I'm going over there and I'm getting her back. She belongs to me. Sometimes my dad was proud of my bravery, but I remember him being angry at the notion and was quick on his feet. You most certainly will not, he said. They belong to her now. I was only 10 years old. I was definitely not grown. I was so sad, and I felt helpless. I cried. Later that week, when Dad was at work, I went over to her house. I had to be sneaky, because Dad would have freaked out if he knew. Susan was in her rec room playing with her toys. Susan's parents were older, and her siblings were grown. Susan was the center of attention in her family's life. Susan didn't take care of her toys. Susan was different from me. When I walked in, my eyes landed on my Mrs. Beasley. She was sitting in my doll high chair that my dad had also given to Susan. But things are different now. My Mrs. Beasley had changed. I tried to choke back my tears, but I felt them streaming down my face regardless. Susan had been quick to cut off all Mrs. Beasley's golden hair. She dressed her in ridiculous baby clothes, and her glasses were nowhere to be found. Poor Mrs. Beasley, her face was scribbled on with magic marker. My dad was right. This is no longer my Mrs. Beasley. She belonged to Susan now. And I'm never going to be able to restore my favorite doll to my Mrs. Beasley again. And I don't think I've ever forgotten a small but mountainous event in my little 10-year-old life. I don't even think my dad knew how much it hurt me. The pain I had for losing that security blanket, like protecting me from his abuse, he just didn't see his evil ways the way most of us do. It would be many years before I was ever reminded of that story. Now fast forward 25 years, the millennium. Some of you will recall how exciting it was. Or not. The calendars would change forever. 1999's over. It's now 2000. We were warned of mass pandemonium. They said the computers wouldn't turn over. The banks couldn't transfer the data. All would be lost. Those great pension plans, they'd be inaccessible. There was a mass fear that this generation had not yet experienced. For me, I wasn't afraid. Well, not really. I mean, I didn't build a bunker, but I did take out some extra cash just in case. And I may have bought some extra canned food and stocked up on water, but I wasn't too worried. On New Year's Eve, I said a prayer, as I always do. But this one would be different. And it went kind of like this. Dear God, I have a great life thanks to you. I have a good job, I own a couple houses, I'm a single mom with 3 great kids. I know you're the reason I've been able to build this life, but I want you to know that although I'm grateful, I would love one thing from you, that you bring me someone into my life, someone to share this journey with me. I want romance, God, the real deal. With that, I said, thank you, God, and went fast asleep. On January 7th, 2000, the world had been going on as usual for the last 7 days. I didn't require the cash, or the canned goods, or even the extra water. I thought to myself, good thing I hadn't built a bunker. Like I would have known how to build a bunker anyway. That day, my furnace broke. My house was 13 degrees Celsius. And just when I thought my life couldn't get any crazier, the furnace guy appeared at my door to the rescue. Who knew this was all in God's plan? He sent me the guy, the furnace guy. I thought, wow, God, you work fast. I mean, it had to be his work. I wasn't picking up the tradesmen that came into my home routinely. My furnace guy and I, we would build a life together. One day, many years later, after discussing the need to look after my very sick father, I was struggling. I mean, why should I look after this guy? I mean, he's my dad and I love him, but he's a jerk. He was mean, horrible, and a drunk. I was reminded of the Mrs. Beasley story. I shared it with my husband. You know, I hadn't thought about that story in those 25 years, and it brought back tears. I had no idea this was still impacting me, so raw and so real, even now. It actually solidified the horrible thoughts I had of my dad and justified to my husband, well, I thought, why I held back on caring for my very dependent father today. A week passed. It was, it seemed, a regular Tuesday at our new furnace guy store. We now owned our own heating and cooling company. My office manager came into my office with a delivery. It was a large box covered in brown paper. I had no idea what it was. I hadn't ordered anything. It wasn't my birthday. Most of the items that came to our office were addressed to the furnace guy. This one said, Cheryl-Ann Lovie. I love presents. So I quickly ripped off the brown paper to reveal the box inside. My heart stopped for a minute. My throat had that feeling inside, you know, the one you get when you think you're about to cry. Looking at me through the box with the plastic shield over the front of her face was my very own Mrs. Beasley. She had a hairnet over her blonde hair. Her glasses were secured in a separate location. Her body was held to the box with twist ties like all dolls are when they're packaged. And my office manager looked on in confusion as now my face was completely soaked in tears. What could she be thinking? So many feelings going through my mind at that moment. I tore open the top of the box and I released her from the hold of the twist ties. I took off her hairnet and I just fluffed her hair. She was all there in complete perfection. I placed her glasses back on her face and I just took a moment and I hugged her. Jason appeared at that moment, albeit a little shocked that I had ripped the box. He had a different idea about collectibles than I did, but said simply, Oh, it arrived. Cool. My Prince Charming had heard me. He listened as he always had to my voice and my feelings about that moment as a 10-year-old girl when my first love, my father, had taken my security away from me in one fleeting moment. My husband, as if stepping back in time, has forever changed the story of a little girl, emotionally and physically abused by her dad, to now a love story of Mrs. Beasley's triumphant return. Pushing my dad in a wheelchair, he's feeble now. His hands are deformed from a painful rheumatoid arthritis. He needs me. I'm caring for him now. My father, the one who raised us with his iron fist, the one who abused us. I'm all he has left. I'm doing this with reservations, but I am doing it. Makes me wonder if that myth is real. Only the good die young. One day I was pushing me in his wheelchair down to the cafeteria. He'd been living at the hospital while waiting for a bed in a nursing home. His mind was still sharp and his tongue as evil as always as he began to tell me a story of why my brother's life went south. He tells a story so ridiculous that I'm gaining anger by the second. Not only due to the story, but the context in which he completely changed. I tried to make him understand how wrong he was and that I wasn't going to listen. But he banged his fist on the table, trying to take control of the version of his story. At that moment, in a fury, I walked out. I left him, helpless. He was yelling from his wheelchair for me to come back. I held tight. I quickened my stride. I was taking control now. I was strong and I felt empowered for a hot minute. Before I was out of the hospital, my cell phone rang and the call display read, Dad. I ignored the call. Then seconds later, another call. Then again and again. I just couldn't answer. I think this was a moment I couldn't get over, not this time. I was angry and sad, and I cried and cried. It all came flooding back to me, his horrible parenting, his cruel abuse of us kids, his drunkenness and his horrible treatment of my mom, and his pure lack of care for all of us. I was taking control now, or so I thought. I was giving him a piece of Roger. Wonder how he would like it. I'm now able to speak for myself, and I was in control of my actions, I thought. Right now and right here, Roger, you're not making the rules, I thought to myself. You sit there in that vulnerable spot there in that cafeteria where you're gonna need help to get back to your room. I wanted him to see what it was like to not have anyone to help him. Helpless, vulnerable, and weak. By the time I got home, my phone displayed 4 missed calls and 4 voicemails. I listened. It was my dad, and he was crying. I'm sorry, he said. Please come back, he pleaded. Then don't leave me. I need you. He begged and more crying. Why is this so hard for me? Like, why can't I just walk away? Why am I feeling so bad? Now, of course, I began telling myself what a horrible person I am, a horrible daughter. How could anyone sink so low? I barely slept that night. It's common for me when my mind is so stretched. I hadn't called him back, and I honestly didn't know what I would say. He knew I was angry. I usually just sucked it up, but for some reason, I just couldn't this time. I was sick to my stomach with worry. Worry about him, his loneliness. I continued to beat myself up, and I continued to cry. Jumping in the shower the next day to prepare for work, because nothing stops work. I have one goal to conquer today, and that's just to get ready. Keep it simple, I tell myself. I'm listening to a podcast on my Beats pill, and Eckhart Tolle is explaining ego. I listen to him speak directly to me. You know that feeling you get sometimes when you read something or you listen and you swear like they must know me. He was telling me that when you respond with the actions of others or in response to their actions, you're feeling who you really are. When you hurt from what is not the real you, you're hurting you, me. That was my aha moment. I learned that I was hurting myself by being crappy to my dad. Yes, he deserved it, but this is not who I am. I'm not a cruel, insensitive jerk. He is. If I mirror him, I risk injuring my soul. Well, now it's time to write in my journal. So I write, I will not excuse my dad's behavior, but I will kindly bow out of those conversations and leave without anger or resentment. 2, I will treat my dad with love and respect as I should for my father and not specify whether he deserves it or not. That's the unconditional love part. 3, I specify that my soul is good. My soul is love. And I will feel better projecting that to the world and myself. You know what? I already felt better. I truly felt this power building up inside me that I alone created. I always find that when I write in my journal, it makes me feel better. I went back to the hospital a few days later. I usually did go every day, but I just needed to heal. Dad greeted me as if nothing had happened. He was endearing, and he said, "Hello, kiddo." I was receptive. I said I was sorry for running out on him the other day, and what he was saying really hurt me, and I wanted him to know that he can no longer tell me stories like that, and I won't listen. I'm going to care for you, Dad, but I'm not going to allow anger and hate to come through you to me. It's funny because I knew I was saying this to myself, to reaffirm the message. My dad didn't give a crap. He actually responded, "Well, I'm glad you got over yourself." It's laughable now. My dad was my dad. He wasn't about to change. And I know it's not my job to change him, but it is my job to change and create new stories. And after finding my authentic self that day, I was able to care for my dad and build a relationship with him that I controlled and managed. Creating the boundaries in your life that are necessary for your happiness is truly on your back. Is there a story that you could rewrite if you tried? Try to notice those things that take you to that limit, that make you realize you're mirroring instead of staying focused on your authenticity. Find the non-negotiable truths in your life. Find what you absolutely will never do again, or you'll never be allowed in your life again. Write it down. We need to do this to live our best life. We need to do this to feel real. And we need to do this to love ourselves. Being cruel in defense only leaves scars we have to heal again and again. And to truly love yourself, you must love your actions. If you have some stories in your life that sit and haunt you on the shelves of your brain, it's time to declutter them. Dig them out. Dust them off. Find a way to see the hidden gift. You know, it may sound crazy, but I believe each and every situation has a hidden gift. Maybe you're ready to find your Mrs. Beasley. I forgave my dad, and I forgave myself. My dad died in 2019, and forever I have him inside of me. Not the evil side, but the good side, the strong side. I have no regrets about the last years of his life, and I continue to be grateful for the parents I had to make me the best version I can be for me and my family. The Hallmark card for my dad that was always so hard to buy would be easy now. It would say this: "On the darkest days when I feel inadequate, unloved, and unworthy, I remember whose daughter I am, and I straighten my crown." Incidentally, just the other day, while reviewing the contents of Mrs. Beasley's box that she came in and I rudely tore the top off of, I found this authenticity certificate inside, and it was signed by Cheryl-Ann. Cheryl was an actress that played in the show Charlie's Angels. That was when I was a kid. And Cheryl's also the ambassador for Child Help USA and the voice of Mrs. Beasley. The card reads this: "Your purchase of this doll helps support the work of Child Help USA, one of the country's largest and oldest nonprofit organizations dedicated to the treatment, preventions, and research of child abuse and neglect, bringing hope and healing to abused children since 1959. Wow. This was likely the most impactful sign I could uncover today. I had no idea how this tied together. My book, It's Your Turn, is reinforced by this message. I was a victim of abuse at the hands of my father, and I'll forever treasure that my doll, Mrs. Beasley, is now a representation that we can all be brave with just a little help from our friends.